I tell this as an old man, voice hoarse from years of replaying the same film in my head. I remember the light that afternoon in Boston, the winter of 2008 slipping into spring. The canal by the Charles was glossy as glass. Emily laughed and tucked wind-blown hair behind her ear, and Tom, my best friend since college, was across the table telling a joke about a professor from 1999. I trusted them both without reservation. The world then felt anchored. Mortgages, plans, the certainty of repeatable mornings. "We'll make it work," Emily had said, and I believed her as though the phrase were a promise carved in stone. My voice tightens when I recall the first small fissures, the kind you ignore because they are inconvenient. It was in the autumn of 2010 when I noticed Emily's phone left face down on the kitchen counter, more often messages arriving at odd hours while I worked late at the publishing house in New York. Work had become long cycles, deadlines born from the crash that began in 2007, swallowing whole the normal cadence of life. I told myself it was the stress. Tom, meanwhile, called more frequently, his laugh crackling through the receiver like an old vinyl record. "Everything okay?" he'd ask. I would answer yes, and his silence on the line felt as familiar as a hand on my shoulder. The trust I had was not fragile. It was a fortress built over years of shared pain and small mercies. I married Emily on a humid afternoon in August of 2004 at a church in Evanston, Illinois. I remember the organ playing something from the 1950s, my mother's eyes wet, Tom adjusting my tie as he had done the first day we met as freshmen in Chicago in 1997. The fortress, I thought, would stand through recessions and births and the slow grind of normal life, but the foundation had invisible faults. Little contradictions, an offhand joke from Tom that lingered too long, Emily's insistence that she was tired when I wanted to talk, would later become tremors I could not ignore. I began keeping mental calendars of moments that seemed insignificant then. The night Emily said she had plans, but returned smelling faintly of coffee and something else. The morning Tom dropped by just to go over old papers and stayed until the sun had nearly fallen. It was in Minneapolis, in the winter of 2011, during a holiday party where I had the sense of being a spectator to my own life. Conversations split into shards of small confessions. People compared stories of layoffs and new jobs, and I laughed because laughter is a useful cloak, but inside, my chest felt like an attic where forgotten things gathered dust. I tried to rationalize, because rationalizing keeps the heart from panicking. Emily said she needed space to write. She spoke about a novel, about the impulse that had been hibernating since college. "You know I've always been restless, Daniel," she told me one night in late spring 2012, leaning against the window as rain stitched the city with silver threads. Tom encouraged her. He bought her a new laptop as a push. I saw the two of them together, the easy intimacy of people who had been close for years, and I applauded it internally. I thought the closeness was harmless, an echo of younger days, not a map that would split into secret pathways. The first real sting came in a photograph I found accidentally. It was early autumn 2013. I had been cleaning the attic in our townhouse in Brooklyn. Boxes labeled with dates: June 2005, wedding gifts, December 2006, Christmas. Under a stack of letters, I found a series of images on a flash drive. They were small, pixelated at the edges. Emily and Tom on a weekend trip in Cape Cod, faces too close, smiles that belonged to lovers more than friends. I remember the room tilting, as though someone had pulled a rope at the center of the world. I did not speak. I put the drive back where it had been, and kept going, as if the rest of the day held some meaning that could heal the wound. Denial is a clever animal. For months I folded those images into a locked chest inside me and nailed the lid shut. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the world had given me a cruel hallucination, but the small evidences accumulated like snowfall. I found scented lip balm in the pocket of Tom's jacket when our group went skiing in Vermont in the winter of 2014. A text, accidentally shown on Emily's phone screen in May of 2015, read like an inside joke full of words that made the air between us colder. I confronted neither. I watched them closely, the way someone watches a pot waiting to boil, too afraid to touch, too afraid not to. The day the dam broke is carved into me. It was July of 2016. We had been invited to a backyard barbecue in Portland, Oregon, by mutual friends who had known us since college. There was nothing unusual about the day. Sun, beer, the smell of grilled corn. Tom arrived with the same easy grin he'd always had. Emily wore a sundress I had bought her in the spring. I remember the sound of a kid laughing as he chased a frisbee, and I remember how small those sounds felt amid the roaring inside my head. At some point, Tom asked to speak with me privately. Our conversation began with a laugh and ended with a silence so thick I could feel it like a physical weight. Tom's face was a map of hesitation. He started with the banal: work, the city, mutual friends, then, as if clumsy with the knife, pulled the fabric away. "Dan, he said, and I watched him taste the words. He told me there had been something between him and Emily. He apologized, stumbling through phrases. It happened. It started last year. It was confusing. The world shifted. I remember the air tasting metallic. For a flicker of time, I thought it was a dream. One of those bad ones, where people betray you, and then the alarm pulls you back to safety. But then Tom used my name, steady and real, and the letters in his apology were as sharp as glass. What followed was not cinematic in the way movies portray confrontations. There was no triumphant music, no immediate slamming of doors. There was instead the hollowing, a slow, muffled awareness of all the ordinary gestures that now bore new meanings. The hand squeezes on the shoulder that had once meant comfort now felt like a borrowed thing. I left before the barbecue ended. I wandered the streets of Portland at dusk, July light stretching long and thin, thinking of the life I'd built like a house whose walls had been quietly stacked with someone else's plans. The city glittered, and I felt like a ghost in its reflection. I returned to New York and lived in a fog. Friends asked if I was okay, and I lied with the practiced ease of survival. Just tired, I'd say. At the office, the deadlines were indifferent. Editors wanted copy, and the presses did not care about personal ruin. In the autumn of 2016, as the presidential race tightened and the country argued in living rooms over futures and fears, my private world unraveled quietly. I remember watching news footage of rallies and feeling as though I were watching someone else's life. Riots and debates flickering like the surface of a pond while I sank slowly beneath it. Confrontation with Emily was inevitable. I planned it, like one plans a heart operation. Carefully, with a catalogue of worst cases, we spoke at a diner off Union Square in November of 2016, the coffee lukewarm and the plate of fries between us suddenly irrelevant. She did not deny what Tom had said. Her voice was small, not the same as the woman who once promised forever. "I'm sorry," she said, and then she explained. Loneliness, the feeling of being unseen during the long months when I worked late, a closeness with Tom that had begun as companionship and slid into something else. Her explanations did not match the sharp pain in my chest. Anger arrived in a wave so strong it almost drowned me. It wasn't just the betrayal, but the rewriting of small moments, the dinners that had cost me trust, the nights I thought we had shared. I found myself cataloguing the years: 1997, when Tom and I shared a dorm room; 1999, when Emily and I first kissed under Christmas lights at a party in Evanston; 2004, when we married; 2009, when our first child was born in a small hospital in Brooklyn. Each memory became suspect. Did it hold truth or a clever imitation? I sat on the living room floor and let the catalogue go, tears wetting the hardwood like a slow, steady rain. I tried to make sense of Tom's betrayal in the context of our shared history. He had been best man at my wedding in August of 2004. I had been there when his father lay sick in 1998. Our lives had been braided together. Was there a moment when the braid slipped? I found myself stealing glances at old photographs, looking for clues in the smiles. There were no answers in the images, only the awkward stillness of captured time. At night, I would wake and think of the small domestic rituals, him cutting the crusts off our child's sandwich, Emily tucking the blanket under her chin, and wonder how those gestures could be both sacred and deceitful. The weeks that followed were a strange study in contrasts. I moved into a hotel for several nights in December of 2016, because being in the house felt like trespassing. My son asked simple questions with the brutal honesty of children. "Why can't Daddy sleep here?" I answered poorly, offering platitudes that felt like paper armor. Emily and Tom stopped speaking publicly. Mutual friends carved out neutral ground, avoiding invitations. There were legal talks, lawyers' names thrown like pebbles. I found myself learning terms I had never needed: separation, custody, mediation, words that tasted like iron. There was a small mercy in the winter: distance. Distance is not healing by itself, but it allows the mind to assemble facts with less of the immediate sting. I spent mornings walking along the Hudson in January of 2017, the city a grey watercolor. I would stand and watch ferries grind through the river and think of the simple math of time. Days accumulate into months, months into years. The world does not stop because a heart breaks. I tried to imagine a future without Emily, imagining in small increments, like a man building a new map with missing landmarks. But the past kept intruding: letters, emails, small tokens I had saved. In an old shoebox, I found a ticket stub from a concert we had attended in Boston in April of 2003, the ink still crisp on the fold. I realized that grief is not only loss of what was, but the loss of the future you expected. There were no tidy endings, there were loose threads. I began to write again, fragmented notes that were not for publication but for survival. I wrote about the feel of Emily's hand, about Tom's laugh that once meant home. Writing made the chaos talkable, a language for the stunned. Spring came in fits that year: April rain, May sun, and with it came practicalities that required decisions. We attempted mediation in June of 2017 in a small office in Manhattan. The man across from us had a folder, and the folder smelled of paper and chemical ink. We divided belongings like soldiers mapping out territory. Each item transferred was a small death: the lamp from my grandfather, the painting we had bought together, books whose spines once whispered secrets. At one point, the mediator asked if we could consider co-parenting. Emily's eyes met mine, and there was a history there. But there was also a coldness I could no longer thaw. Despite everything, my son remained my North Star. He was 3, born in 2009, and his laughter cut through bitterness the way light cleaves wood. On Sundays, I took him to the park in Queens, pushing him on the swings while the city roared around us. Children have an uncanny ability to demand presence. They do not allow the mind to remain mired in endless recrimination. In those pockets of ordinary joy, I felt something like repair, not the big, sweeping kind of reconciliation, but a smaller, stern grace that said, keep going, keep breathing, keep building. One afternoon in August of 2017, while sorting through emails for taxes, I found an exchange between Emily and Tom that I had missed before. It was metadata and timestamps, small things that reveal the architecture of secrets. Their messages were threaded with dates, trips they took, Nights they had, explanations that were elastic with truth. There was a name of a motel in New Jersey and a photograph attached, a blurred image of a hotel corridor and two shadows. It was a locational proof I could not unsee. My hands shook as if I were cold, and I remember thinking, all the years are suddenly measured not by anniversaries, but by betrayals. Anger resurfaced with cold precision. I confronted Tom at his small apartment in Brooklyn on a rainy September night. He opened the door with the look of a man who knows he must surrender. There was no heroism left in me, only the desperate wish to be honest in a moment that had been dishonest for so long. "Why?" I asked, not because I expected an explanation, but because silence is a worse companion. He told me he had wanted something he could not name, that he had slipped, that he was sorry in a way that sounded rehearsed. I left before the conversation could become an argument. There was nothing to salvage. Community fractures in odd ways. Mutual friends became footnotes. Gatherings thinned. I remember one holiday party in December of 2017 where people exchanged polite gossip about jobs and puppies while eyeing the empty chair where I used to sit. The town where Tom and I had met, Oak Park, Illinois, felt farther than it was. The small rituals, calls on birthdays, shared dinners, became dangerous territories. People choose sides as if selecting teams. That reality hit me harder than the infidelity itself. It was not only a private betrayal, it had social consequences. I attempted clumsily to rebuild. Therapy was a room with a clock whose hands marched like a metronome to a new rhythm. I told a therapist about that attic photograph and the motel corridor, about the rusted trust. He asked me to name what I wanted next. I said I wanted to feel intact again. He suggested small tasks: reclaim the bedroom by repainting it, go to a new coffee shop, make a friend who knew nothing of the story. The tasks seemed dumbly trivial, but I began them anyway. There were small triumphs: my son asleep in my arms, a night where I laughed without thinking of betrayal, and layers of me uncracked a fraction. Time, ever impartial, stitched shallow scabs over wounds. In the spring of 2018, Emily moved into an apartment in Queens. Tom left the city for a job in Seattle in the summer of 2019. The geography of my life changed, and with it, the texture of my grief. There were moments of vengeance imagined, the public exposure, the dramatic scene in some bar with fists and accusations. But revenge is a brittle craft. I found the quieter path more enduring, changing the small things that were mine to change. I reconnected with my father after a long drought, flew back to Evanston for a funeral in the autumn of 2020, and found a map of myself in places I had not visited in years. And yet, as I said, closure does not arrive neatly. On crisp morning in October of 2021, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single envelope and a photograph folded twice. When I opened it, the photograph was of Emily and Tom at a party in San Francisco, their faces lit by a warm amber light, and in the background someone familiar. My son, older by months I had missed, smiling at a toy I did not recognize. The bottom right corner of the photo had a scrawl: "Forgive me." The handwriting was not Emily's. I felt an old raw wind rise in the room. I sat down hard on the stoop of my building, the city around me oblivious, and I realized one immutable thing: the landscape of my life had shifted, and no map would ever fit it again. The envelope trembled between my fingers, and at that moment a knock came on my door, so deliberate it felt like fate. This was another incredible story from our channel. Life teaches us that it's never too late for justice, revenge, or redemption. Every story you heard here is real, experienced by people who found strength when everyone thought they were defeated. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What do you think about this situation? Your opinion matters to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell so you do not miss any of our exciting stories. We have new tales of betrayal, intrigue, and revenge every week. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to fight for it properly. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and showing that it's possible to solve all problems. Thank you for being part of our community. Until the next story, remember, every ending can be a new beginning. See you in the next video.